It was a late Friday night, and I was home alone for the first time in years. My parents had gone out of town, leaving me to fend for myself in our old, creaky house. I thought I'd enjoy the peace and quiet, but as the night wore on, a gnawing unease settled over me. The wind outside howled like a wounded animal, making the windows rattle. I tried to distract myself with a book, but my mind kept drifting to the storm and the shadows it cast around the room. Eventually, I decided to turn in for the night, hoping sleep would come quickly. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, each step echoing through the silent house. As I reached the top, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the drafty old house. I slipped into my room, closing the door behind me, and settled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling louder. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I lay still, straining to hear over the sound of the storm. Another thud, louder this time, echoed through the house. I sat up, my pulse quickening. "It's just the wind," I muttered to myself, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, the beam piercing the darkness of my room. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. I opened my bedroom door and peered into the dark hallway. Everything was still, but the air felt thick with tension. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hall, the flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. As I descended the stairs, the thudding grew louder and more persistent. It seemed to be coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned the corner, the flashlight sweeping across the room. I froze. In the dim light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood in the middle of the living room, hunched over and grotesque. Its skin was an unnatural shade of gray, stretched taut over sharp bones. It had no eyes, just dark, empty sockets, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream, revealing rows of jagged teeth. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. The figure turned its head towards me, its eyeless gaze locking onto mine. My body jolted into action and I stumbled backward, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. The creature took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. I could hear the sound of its bones cracking with each step. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart racing. I could hear it following me, its heavy footsteps pounding on the wooden floor. I reached my bedroom and slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. I backed away, my eyes never leaving the door. The pounding footsteps grew louder, closer. The door rattled as the creature slammed into it, the wood creaking under the force. Desperation took hold of me. I looked around the room, searching for something to defend myself with. My eyes fell on the heavy desk chair. I grabbed it and held it in front of me, my last line of defense. The door began to splinter, cracks spreading like spider webs. I could see the creature's gnarled fingers poking through, its claws scraping against the wood. With a final deafening crash, the door burst open and the creature stood there, its hollow sockets fixed on me. It lunged, moving with terrifying speed. I swung the chair with all my strength, but the creature swatted it away effortlessly. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed and falling to the floor. The creature loomed over me, its mouth opening wider, emitting a guttural growl that shook me to my core. In a blind panic, I kicked at it, my foot connecting with its bony chest. It staggered back, giving me a moment to scramble to my feet. I darted towards the window, throwing it open and climbing out onto the roof, the rain pouring down in icy torrents. I clung to the edge of the roof, my fingers numb from the cold. The creature followed, its skeletal form silhouetted against the flashes of lightning. It moved with a relentless determination, its eyeless gaze never leaving me. With no other option, I leapt from the roof, crashing into the bushes below. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline kept me moving. I sprinted through the yard, the creature's growls echoing behind me. I reached the neighbor's house and pounded on the door, screaming for help. The door opened and I stumbled inside, collapsing in a heap. My neighbor looked down at me, horror etched on their face. "What happened?" they asked, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was point back towards my house, where the creature still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Exploring abandoned buildings had always been my thing. The thrill of uncovering forgotten history, the eerie quiet, the stories etched into the walls, it all drew me in. So when I heard about an old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of a small, eerie town, I couldn't resist. Little did I know that this adventure would leave me with nightmares that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I arrived in the town just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the deserted streets. The town itself felt like it had been plucked straight out of a horror movie. Dilapidated buildings, rusting signs, and an unsettling silence greeted me as I drove through. It was as if the town had been frozen in time, abandoned by everyone except for the ghosts of its past. The mansion was perched on a hill overlooking the town like a sentinel. It was a sprawling Victorian structure with turrets, gables, and broken windows that stared like empty eyes. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the house was aware of my presence and didn't want me there. I parked my car at the bottom of the hill and made my way up the overgrown path. The crunch of dead leaves under my boots was the only sound in the oppressive silence. The front door was ajar, creaking on its hinges, as if inviting me inside. I hesitated for a moment, a sense of dread washing over me, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside the mansion was a labyrinth of decaying grandeur. Faded wallpaper peeled away from the walls, and dust covered every surface. The air was stale, carrying a faint smell of rot and something else I couldn't quite place. I took out my flashlight and swept the beam across the grand foyer, revealing a staircase that led to the upper floors. As I ascended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified in the silence. When I reached the second floor, I was greeted by a long hallway lined with doors. I chose one at random and pushed it open. The room was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A small bed with a dusty canopy, toys scattered on the floor, and a cracked mirror on the dresser. My flashlight beam fell on a doll sitting on a chair in the corner. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly left the room, closing the door behind me. Continuing down the hallway, I found myself drawn to a door at the end. It was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light flickering inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached. Pushing the door open, I was hit by a wave of cold air that took my breath away. The room was a study, filled with old books and papers. A fireplace dominated one wall, and in front of it, an old high-backed chair faced away from me. The flickering light came from a candle on a nearby table, though I hadn't seen anyone light it. I stepped inside and the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into darkness except for the candle's glow. I tried to calm my racing heart as I approached the chair. As I reached out to touch it, the chair slowly began to turn. My breath caught in my throat as I saw what was sitting in it. A figure, gaunt and skeletal, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and a chill washed over me, freezing me in place. Suddenly, the candle went out, and the room was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. Panic set in as I felt a cold hand brush against my neck. I turned to run, but the door wouldn't budge. I was trapped. In the pitch-black room, I heard whispers all around me, voices overlapping and growing louder. They spoke of sorrow, pain, and anger. My head throbbed with their intensity, and I fell to my knees, clutching my ears. The cold hand returned, this time gripping my shoulder with an icy, vice-like grip. I screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the darkness. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whispers stopped. The door flew open, and I scrambled out of the room, nearly tripping over my own feet. I raced down the stairs and out of the mansion, not stopping until I reached my car. I looked back once, and in the upstairs window, I saw the figure watching me, its hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. I never returned to that town, and I never spoke of what happened in that mansion, but the nightmares followed me. Every night I would see those hollow eyes and hear those whispers, and I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. That mansion wasn't just abandoned, it was haunted by something malevolent, something that had marked me as its own. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, it would always find me. It was a stormy Friday night, and I was the last one left at the office. My co-workers had left early to avoid the worst of the storm, but I had a deadline to meet, and my stubbornness kept me chained to my desk. The power had already flickered a few times, casting the usually vibrant workspace into an eerie semi-darkness, lit only by the dim glow of my computer screen. The old building creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside. I tried to focus on my work, but every sound seemed amplified in the empty office. The steady hum of the HV systems suddenly ceased, and an unsettling silence filled the room. I shivered, brushing off the sudden chill in the air as just another drafty window. As I typed, I heard a faint whisper. I paused, heart pounding, and looked around, but the open-plan office was deserted. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just the wind. But then it came again, closer this time. A hushed voice, impossible to decipher but undeniably real. Goosebumps prickled my skin as I strained to hear. The whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. I stood up, deciding to take a break and clear my head. The office felt different now, almost hostile. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways, and the air felt heavy, oppressive. I walked towards the break room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Halfway there, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate. The small beam of light did little to dispel the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. As I turned a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, barely visible in the faint light. It was a woman, her features obscured by the darkness, but I could see her eyes, glowing a sickly yellow, fixated on me. My breath caught in my throat as she started to move towards me, her steps slow and deliberate. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice trembling. The woman said nothing, continuing her slow, menacing advance. I turned and ran, my phone's flashlight bouncing wildly as I sprinted back to my desk. I grabbed my keys and bag, desperate to get out of the building. As I reached the elevator, I heard the whispering again, now a cacophony of voices surrounding me. The elevator doors opened with a ding, and I stumbled inside, frantically pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors began to close, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But then, just before they shut completely, I saw her again, standing right outside the elevator, her eyes glowing brighter than before. The doors closed, and the elevator began its descent, but the whispering continued, growing louder and more frantic. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the elevator to move faster. Finally, it reached the ground floor, and the doors opened. I bolted out, not daring to look back, and dashed through the lobby towards the exit. As I reached the door, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, but there was no one there. The whispering stopped, replaced by the deafening silence of the storm outside. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, locking the doors and fumbling with the keys to start the engine. As I drove away, I glanced back at the office building, half expecting to see her standing in the window, watching me leave. I never stayed late at the office again. The memory of that night haunted me. The whispering voices and those glowing yellow eyes seared into my mind. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but one thing is certain. I was not alone in that building.